Hi, welcome to Caracole, Caraconference 2021, brought to you by Caracole, Greater Cincinnati's AIDS service organization devoted to positively changing lives in the fight against HIV and AIDS. I'm Muggs DeMayo, Client Service Specialist at Caracole, and I'll be sharing some housekeeping reminders before we get started today. If you're not familiar with Caracole, we encourage you to visit our website or follow us on social media to learn more about our work. We are all probably well acquainted with Zoom due to COVID. Just in case, a few reminders. Please use the chat feature for technical issues or other general questions or comments. For questions for our speakers, please put those in the Q&A section. I'll be monitoring them and will provide to the speaker at a natural break in the content. These features are also available if you're joining us from a mobile device. At the end of today's session, please remember to fill out the evaluation that pops up after you exit the webinar. The link is also located in your program. To receive CEUs, you must complete the evaluation before 5 p.m. tomorrow in order to receive credit. At the end of today, in the US, more than 32 states, including Ohio, have unjust and outdated HIV laws. The Ohio Health Modernization Movement's mission is to replace these fear-based, stigmatizing laws with evidence-based, non-discriminatory laws that protect public health. Learn more at OhioModernize.org, OHModernizenow.org. Let's hear a little more about these laws from one of tonight's speakers, Bryan C. Jones.
Your silence doesn't help you, and my silence won't help me, so it's better to speak. Hello, my name is Bryan C. Jones. I'm a person who's been thriving with AIDS, going into my 38th year. Can you believe that? Ohio currently is considered a hot zone for prosecuting people living with HIV and AIDS. We do know that Black people and people of color carry the brunt of new diagnoses and those living with HIV and AIDS. But when it comes to looking at how the money is actually divvied up and where it's been sent to, it doesn't equal up. And HIV criminalization laws is just another notch in their belt of how they're going to imprison us. I didn't know about these laws, so I knew there were a lot of other people who were hiding in the shadows like me. I call what I was doing, I call it my Anne Frank syndrome. I was hiding somewhere, waiting for somebody to open the door and discover me. You hide in silence for so long that when you step out in the open, you don't know if the past is gonna creep up on you. You just don't know. And even today, I'm as open as a book about anybody can be about the status, but I still sleep on eggshells. I still wait to hear that knock on the door. And one person I met, and we were talking, I disclosed my status. I said, well, I'm glad you told me because I think I might have been exposed to HIV, XYZ. I said, well, if you ever need help, I'll go with you to get tested. So about 4 months later, the person called me and said, hi, I need your help. I said, great. I need somewhere to stay. I said, well, that wasn't the kind of help I was talking about. I told you I would go with you to get tested. I remember the conversation you said you thought you had been exposed to HIV. They said, no. I remember that we had sex and you gave me HIV and I'm going to the police. I said, well, go ahead. Because we would have had to done at least hold hands. So you go right ahead and think you're gonna do that. But just the fact that they thought that they could do that, it made you realize that a lot of people are being incarcerated just on a lie. But people living with HIV currently under the law that we have now, you're guilty until you prove yourself innocent and you have no defense. The fact that we as people living with HIV and AIDS just want to touch, just want to hug, just want to hold and feel human. And these laws take away that right from us. I'm not HIV positive. I'm a person living with HIV because I'm more than just my status. I don't have a disease. I have a virus. I didn't get infected. I contracted HIV. We're making sure that we can't transmit HIV to other people, but we're still being prosecuted. We're still being persecuted. We're still being ostracized in a major way. I'm going to speak, and I'm going to continue to speak for people living with HIV because this is our fight, and I'm tired of asking permission to do the work that I need to do.
And now on to today's session, the need to modernize HIV criminalization laws. I'm pleased to introduce Bryan C. Jones and Adam Reilly. Bryan C. Jones has been thriving with HIV for the past 38 years and advocating for persons living with HIV for more than half that time. He is a founding steering committee member and ambassador of the global U=U movement and prevention campaign. He has presented on HIV prevention and housing, in HIV housing and instability, both nationally and internationally. In addition, Jones is responsible for mobilizing Ohio around modernizing their HIV criminalization laws. As a response to his advocacy efforts over the years, Ohio now has an Ohio Health Modernization Movement, a coalition dedicated to modernizing health laws. Jones is also the founder of the DIRT advocacy movement and the Sankofa HIV initiative, which provides an educational healing weekend for persons living with HIV/AIDS. Adam Reilly has worked with the HIV positive community and in HIV prevention for 14 years. During this time, he has provided testing and counseling services along with one-on-one and group work with those living with HIV and AIDS. Reilly also spearheaded local syringe exchange efforts to better serve the community of those who inject drugs and was a driving force behind the 2014 Ohio law that allowed for syringe exchange and access throughout the state. He was voted Advocate of the Year in City Beat's 2011 Best of the City issue, received the Oscar Armstrong Award from Public Allies in 2013, and the Cincinnati Exchange Project was awarded the 2015 Healthcare Heroes Award from the Cincinnati Business Courier. He is a fellow for Caring Ambassadors and also sits on the Ohio Health Modernization Movement Steering Committee.
Right. Well, thank you, Muggs, for that great introduction. Good evening, everybody. Like Muggs said, I'm Adam Reilly, and I'm going to be presenting today with Bryan, and I'm really excited about that. So we're going to talk today about what criminalization of HIV looks like in Ohio. And we're going to talk about ways for people living with HIV to protect themselves and ways that people who serve that population, whether they're case managers, medical providers, can make sure that they understand how the law is written, give good advice, and hopefully get involved in the movement to modernize the laws as well. Yeah, we have no financial disclosures to give. All right, so who we are. So I said that Ohio Health the Ohio Health Modernization Movement is made up of a coalition of organizations and individuals from across the state of Ohio who are dedicated to ending the criminalization of HIV in Ohio. We are one of 32 or so states that currently have such criminalization laws. And then learning objectives for today. So we're going to go over a little bit of basic HIV information, learn how the current law criminalizes HIV, and understand the legal requirements for people living with HIV to discuss their status to a potential sex partner and learn acceptable methods of doing so and documentation, those kinds of things. And acquire general knowledge about why and how Ohio law can be modernized. So, why and how are HIV laws important to ending the epidemic? I'm going to say a little bit about this real quick, but I really want to hear what Bryan has to say as well. But I am in an area of Ohio, and so is Bryan, that has been identified as a hotspot for HIV. So there's extra funding coming from the federal government under the Ending the HIV Epidemic National Plan, which is great. They've come out with plans before over the years, but they never really put serious funding behind it. And this is kind of the first time that I know that they've really, really put some real money behind it, which is exciting because you'll actually be able to do something about it. But one of the reasons that it's so important is that the three in Ohio, the three hotspots are Hamilton County, Franklin County, and Cuyahoga County. So the three C's. And all of those areas, when they came up with their plan to submit to the federal government, called out the need for these laws to be modernized because they're so stigmatizing and they have negative public health impacts, not what was intended when these laws were written. So I am really of the mind that if we don't at least modernize these laws, because in my mind, they need to just get rid of totally. But that's probably not going to happen the way that Ohio is structured and who is, in charge in Columbus. So our next best bet is to modernize. And I don't think that we can meet the goal of ending the HIV epidemic. And what that goal is to reduce the new cases of HIV by 90% by the year 2030. And I just don't think that's possible if these laws aren't changed. So Bryan, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Well, I first want to start, hello everyone. I first want to start by saying that the government can't have it both ways. On one hand, when it comes to giving us health care and Social Security and things like that, they say it's a manageable chronic condition. But when it comes to prosecuting us, they say we hand down a death sentence. So the Ending the Epidemic plan says that modernizing criminalization laws is something that we have to address. And everything is focused on viral suppression. But for me, and this is Bryan's version, I think that acceptance should be the macro and viral suppression should be the micro. Because there is no real viral suppression if you don't have acceptance of your status and understanding the condition that you have. And these laws compound the stigma. I say the stigma in everything. The stigma in being too Black, too dark, too light, too tall. The systemic and structural disparities that exist with these laws also. It should be no surprise that Black people and people of color are most impacted by these laws because we're most impacted by everything else. And how can you reach those people whom you claim to be trying to help when you have these laws? So I'm going to leave that alone because I'll talk for an hour about why and how. I think the government knows why and how, because when the Ryan White Care Act was first handed down, they wanted states to have some accountability. And these states came up with these laws. But when it was reenacted, that wasn't a part of it. So the government knew that the science had changed, but still left it up to the states. And the states have been holding on to these archaic laws, and it's really doing us a disservice. I'm done.
And these for everybody to know, there are more than one HIV related statute. Most people think that there's only one, or they don't even realize there's any at all, but there are 6 of them. So there's the felonious assault law. There's one that deals with solicitation, one that deals with loitering, to engage in solicitation, which is very specific, prostitution, harassment with a bodily substance, and then selling or donating blood. All of these things can be felony charges for someone living with HIV. Bryan, do you want to talk a little bit more about any specific one of these laws?
Well, I just think the one that talks about, I don't really see it there. There's one, I think a part of one of these talks about attempting to engage in solicitation. How can you attempt to? people are being targeted. LGBTQ communities are being targeted. Our trans community is being targeted, but Black folks are being targeted twice as much because I'm Black before I'm LGBTQ. So I have to think about everything else that impacts me as a Black man, and then think about I'm also living with HIV. And, they do stop and frisk tactics. If you have more than a few condoms on you, that's reason to stop and detain you. Many of these people, the police force know some of the people who engage in sex work or used to. So now they know a little history about them. So now they're targeting them at every turn. They could just be coming from the grocery store and they'll say they're engaging in sex work with the chicken that they got in the bag or something. It's just crazy. And I'm just saying that because we've got to learn to laugh at this stuff because it's so serious. Because if you don't, you will be depressed. So that's all I'm going to say.
That's true, a true sentiment. And one thing to point out with these laws is that each of those statutes, if somebody's charged with those and they're convicted under them, they could then have to file as a sex offender for, the rest of their life. I mean, we're talking about things that are going to have a huge impact, not just on that person right then and there, not just on them while they're, repaying their debt to society in a prison cell somewhere, but it'll follow them for the rest of their life. And then what does that mean for their employment? How does this impact their families? I mean, it's huge, the impact that these laws are having on people. So this talks about what the law requires. So really in Ohio, it doesn't matter if transmission occurred, doesn't matter at all. All that matters is if you disclosed your status before you engaged in whatever activity is the root of, the charges being brought against somebody. So what's interesting about that is some of the sexual acts specifically that, any sex act you could get charged with. And I think most people know that not any sex act is going to transmit HIV. So things that are really, really low risk, people can get, charged with. Bryan, what do you think about because one of the things that I think is the craziest about this law is that it doesn't require any harm to occur, as in transmission of HIV. And it's because I always think well, how can you be charged with murder if you didn't murder somebody? So, how can you be charged with something that you didn't even transmit to another person?
Well, I think even in the courtroom, they don't allow the science in the courtroom. There is something called phylogenetic testing that can rule you out as being the person who transmitted it to someone, but it can't say you are the person because many people have the same virus profile. But it can rule out that you were not the person. But the courts don't care about that. It's simply about the fact that you did not disclose. We all should be responsible for our own sexual health. And I think this is a good place for, and I don't know if it's a slide later on, we've done this a lot. I think it's a good place to talk about the Stigma Index because it's important. The Stigma Index is the largest social research project of its kind, implemented, developed, and carried out by people living with HIV and AIDS. It first came out in 2008. And I implore you, if you continue to do this work or interested in this work, to just browse through the Stigma Index. It gives us statistics of how a person living with HIV moves through life. For instance, it talks about people saying that 49% of the people said that they thought that it wasn't a reason to delay care because you might be prosecuted. But 51% said that they would delay care for fear of being prosecuted. And 60% of the people surveyed felt that they would not be given a fair trial simply because they were a person living with HIV. Also, a large number of people said that they did not want to go see their ID doctor for fear that their doctor would be asked to testify against them. So, like I said before, stigma is the biggest barrier, but access to care is bigger than stigma to me. And we keep saying stigma, 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 stigma. Let's look at systemic and structural barriers. And mass incarceration is real. And like I said, it's just another notch in their belt to prosecute us. That's why no intent has to be done. I mean, no harm has to really be done. People live with, and as much as we like to think these laws are targeting people running around trying to purposely transmit HIV, another thing that the Stigma Index points out that a large number of people, after they received their diagnosis, the following year got tested again. Why do you think that is? Because they were in denial. They did not believe that they had HIV. So how can you hold a person accountable if they don't have acceptance or understanding of the situation they're in, that they have? And people automatically assume that we know how to disclose. I mean, it's like learning how to live and walk all over again. And so I'm going to leave it there and let you pick up again.
Well, you bring up 2 points that the Stigma Index really does point out that I have experienced through my work, like the whole people not wanting to go to medical care. Well, that happens for people who were trying to get tested for HIV. I've had a ton of people over the years not want to get, a ton might be a little dramatic, but I've had a fair number of people over the years refuse to get tested by us when we're like out on our van or out doing outreach testing, that kind of stuff, because they've heard of this law. They don't really understand how it works or anything, but they think it's retroactive. So they don't want to get tested at all because they think as soon as they do, everybody they've ever been with is going to be able to bring charges against them. And that's not how that works. But, me trying to explain that on the street to, some stranger, why should they believe me? And then the other thing you said was like, there's this image in people's heads that people with HIV are like going around intentionally trying to infect people. Like that just is not happening. Like that is not a thing. I'm sure there's been over history a handful of people who did that, but you know what? If they did that, that's because they're crazy, not because they have HIV. I mean, and that whole profile that people have in their mind of people living with HIV is so false. Like the people that I've diagnosed over the years, there's a lot of shock. It takes a time for them to come to terms with it, like Bryan was saying. And it's a lot of people aren't, they feel like, oh, I just found out I have HIV. I want to make sure that I'm not like passing it on to someone else. I don't want to put someone else in the situation. That is generally like the first or second or third thought that the person is having. So the whole idea that there's this predator group of people who have HIV is just a completely false narrative.
So, like I said, as much as we like to think that it's getting the bad people, so to speak, what is happening here? Mothers are being separated from the children. Women who are in abusive relationships or people who are in abusive relationships, not just women, are being blackmailed to stay in those relationships. People are being threatened. People are being lied on. And some of these laws in other states are crazy. I think down south, a woman couldn't get pregnant if she was, I think she can get pregnant. She couldn't get birth. So what is she supposed to walk around with a baby for 10 years? I mean, some of the laws are crazy. We have HIV specific laws, but other states prosecute under general laws, weapons of mass destruction, attempted murder, biohazardous waste, are just crazy. And what it does, it makes the entire, I keep turning that phone off, but I think it's possessed. It's like the Twilight Zone. I turned it off. Now it's doing something. And that's just like these laws. You can try to turn them off, but they'll keep on. It's the gift that keeps on giving and giving and giving. And it's not necessarily in a good way. It continues to make us criminals. People who are diagnosed here, AIDS, prison, when they tell you. And that's all you hear, and you don't understand the concept. And those people who are not living with HIV, like you say, they're afraid to get tested, but they also are helping to perpetuate the stigma. And the reason being, in some ways, I don't necessarily fault them, because our government has not done anything to nip it in the bud. Also, the end of the epidemic plans, we have 3 jurisdictions. It's time for our health departments to make a public statement. It's time for our state health department, and some of y'all on here from there, I'm sorry, but you're sitting in that seat. It's time for our state health department to make a public statement that these laws are unjust. How can we're either going to prosecute HIV or treat it. We can't do both, and we can't test our way out of this pandemic. And yes, it's still a pandemic.
Or arrest our way out of it either.
Yeah.
So this is interesting, like what counts as an adequate proof of disclosure. There's all kinds of people in Ohio that thought, they disclosed as they should have and thought they were protected, and then found out later that they weren't, because the courts don't accept a lot of forms of documentation. Like they're not going to accept just a verbal conversation or a general note that you wrote down and they signed or something like that. There's got to be like a timestamp, and it has to meet like the level of scrutiny for evidence in a law of court, basically. And who does that? Have you ever written a contract before you've had sex with somebody?
And you have to get, who you gonna get, the bartender to witness it?
Right. Are they notaries? Yeah, right. How do you do that? And who does that? How do you have an expectation for a group of people to do something like that when
it kills the mood too? Come on.
It's not a very good part of foreplay, I would think.
Yeah. But it's a must play, and the only real time I have known a defense is when a person brought them in to see their doctor and they put it in their case notes. A lot of people think when they're on the hookup sites, by putting it in your profile, that's disclosure, but you have to prove that a person read your profile, because a lot of times people just look at pictures and then they're all in.
Right.
There is really no fail-safe way, because the courts, it's simply about the fact they say you didn't disclose. But why is it all being put on us to do the disclosing? Also, one thing I want to point out is the law says that the person that you disclose to has to be mentally capable of understanding what disclosure is, but it does not protect the person who's supposed to do the disclosure. If I'm a person living with HIV, and in many cases, HIV and some mental health issues, even if it's not a clinically diagnosed mental health, you still go through mental trauma, but it doesn't protect you. And if you have a clinical diagnosis, it still doesn't protect you. You may not even understand what this means, but you still have to carry the burden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another disappointing aspect about this law, is that it really puts all the burden on the person living with HIV and almost makes it seem like, if it's two consenting adults, then you've both consented to to participate in whatever sex acts you're participating in. And why is that person, because one of them was HIV positive, why are they now all of a sudden responsible for their sexual health and their partner's sexual health? And their partner has no responsibility there. And I'm not a big fan of this term, but like, where does the personal responsibility come in for both parties? It doesn't make any sense. And the fact that like, there's not really an affirmative defense that someone can provide other than these documentation ideas that are on this slide. That's really all they can do, because they, like Bryan said, they're not going to bring in molecular testing. If a doctor comes in as a witness or something and starts to talk about viral oppression and U equals U and what all of that means, that doesn't matter to the case.
It was one thing you said. I can't. I'm old. I'm getting old here. We were talking about. I can't remember what it was. Go ahead.
It'll come back
to me. But science has been introduced. I have seen science introduced once, and this was a case in Arkansas where a gentleman was being prosecuted, and U equals U came into play, and he got probation. That's the only time that I have actually seen it take place like that. Another thing is, on the hookup sites, I did an experiment on Grindr. I went through there to see how many people I knew personally were living with HIV, who said they were on PrEP, negative on PrEP. The reason being is we have to be careful when we talk about PrEP. We have to say Truvada for PrEP, or whatever that is, a Discovia for PrEP. I don't know what the second one is, but a lot of people just say PrEP, or Truvada is PrEP, but it has to be Truvada for PrEP. So a lot of people think, I can get around this. I'm on Truvada, so I'm saying I'm on PrEP because people are saying Truvada is PrEP, not for PrEP. So I'm on Truvada, so I can push this button and say I'm on PrEP. So that'll start the conversation. I'm telling you I'm on medication, but I'm not telling you what I'm on medication for, because in a lot of their minds, some people are trying to skirt around the system, but some people really don't know that it's Truvada for PrEP. They think Truvada is PrEP, and they think that is an option for them. And I saw quite a few people who hit that button, but that is not a defense.
No, that is not a defense. And Bryan, I think that's something that a lot of people are doing, not just in your area too. Mm-hmm. But here are some of the examples of what proof of disclosure could be. So it's basically like you need to record it. A video would be best, or having some kind of contract, basically, that's signed, and then you take a picture of it so that the picture will have like a date and time stamp on it.
And all a person has to say is, we were out drinking, I was drunk. I wasn't in control of what I was doing. It's almost like, and I don't want to compare it to no means no, but the person can say, we were at the bar, I was intoxicated. And that is enough. It always makes the other person the victim. And many times, I have disclosed to people, and they still wanted to have condomless sex. And I'm like, no, this was before U equals U. And even it was still no, because I'm like, if you want to have condomless sex with me, you need to get tested. And if you're this eager to still want to have it, not saying that I don't deserve it, but you're looking past this. I'm not just about sex. And I think that's a misconception that people have. If you have an HIV diagnosis, that you're hypersexual. And especially Black people have always been over-sexualized. But for people living with HIV, or even heterosexual women, we all have to constantly defend ourselves. We did not do anything. We did what everyone has a right to do. which is have a healthy sex life. And it was outlined in the Denver Principles in 1983. We have a right to a healthy sex life. We also have a right to live and die in dignity. We certainly can't live in dignity. And back then you couldn't die in dignity because the funeral homes wouldn't take the bodies. So these laws are basically burying you now. Because of these laws, we still can't live and continue to live with dignity.
Oh, and this is talking about a fairly recent, like within the last 5 to 7 years or so,
Yeah.
where there was a case brought to Ohio Supreme Court, and they did uphold the law, and it was it was brought up on like free speech grounds, but they did upheld the law, which is another reason why we've now moved on to the modernization, because I think at the time there was a lot of hope that this would, knock down all those laws, and it just didn't. So talking about who else it criminalizes, obviously, we talked a little bit about sex workers. Equality Ohio is a part of the Ohio Health Modernization, and they've been having some interns, some legal interns, do some research into each county in Ohio to see, how are these laws being used? And it's still raw data. They haven't gotten through all of it. They haven't gotten through every county yet, but they've gotten through a lot of it. And I think all of us were pretty surprised, maybe not surprised, but it was a little surprising to me how much the bodily fluids statute is being used. And that is being used it's even more of a problem, I think, than the initial charges, because that's used when someone is in, say, jail already. They're downtown at the Justice Center, and they maybe spit on somebody or some other bodily fluid. And if they're living with HIV, they're going to get a felony upcharge for that. There's already a charge associated with that. It's a misdemeanor charge. So why are you, it's just another way of keeping people incarcerated, and then keeping them incarcerated for even longer.
I mean, who wants somebody to throw feces or urine on them? That is bad enough in itself. The HIV has nothing to do with it. And what we see is the media sensationalizing the story. A person could shoplift some hamburger from the grocery store, and the headline was, "Man with HIV steals hamburger." Mm-hmm. What those two have to do with each other is absolutely nothing. Another thing is, we put a lot of weight into men going to prison, coming back out, transmitting HIV. As someone who's been incarcerated, it's been my experience, you don't go to prison and start messing with men. You were doing it before you got there. And a lot of times when you're in relationships, people see what they want to see. And they accept what they want to accept because they want it to seem fair seemingly. So we've got to start having real conversations with ourselves. It's not just about disclosing HIV. It's about disclosing sexual habits, sexual practices. It's a misconception that anal sex is gay sex. But in the studies that substantiated U equals U, 500 heterosexual couples were followed, and many of them had anal sex. That's why that song, "You Better Bag That Thing Up," came out. Everybody was bagging it up, but nobody wanted to say what they was bagging up.
Oh, that's good. So this is talking about what people who are living with HIV can do a little bit more to protect themselves. Bryan, do you want to talk about, maybe, if you're comfortable, what you do or what you advise other people? Because I know people come to you and they want your advice. Like, what do you advise people to do?
Well, my thing is this. I do it up front. If it's social media or suits some virtual kind of contact, I say it up front because you're going to be worried either way. So I might as well get it out of the way. I learned, it took me going to prison to learn that I have to stop making other people's shit my shit. This is what I have, and if you can't accept that, then that's fine. Another thing is, you've got to be honest with yourself. You've got to educate yourself. You've got to be able to tell people about U equals U. You've got to be able to show them. And that's another problem. And I'm glad that the Ending the Epidemic funding is starting to put U equals U on their website. But the problem that I have is it's not glaring at you like PrEP. U equals U needs to be given the same amount of weight as PrEP, because it is our way of saying we're being responsible. We are doing our part not to transmit HIV to someone else. Also, it's important. The government wants you to disclose, but doesn't want to make the environment safe for you to disclose. I have seen stigma in the worst form. I was speaking at a university. I got heckled from the audience, and I kept it going. When I was going to my car, I got hit over the head with a tire iron, and I had to get staples in the back of my head. I met somebody, I was talking, another incident, I met somebody, and we hadn't even held hands. We had been talking for maybe a week and a half or something. I disclosed my status. It's funny that my car got burnt up in the driveway that night. And it's not a coincidence. I didn't see the person doing it, but for me, I know that was the cause of it, because they were irate. And I'm like, well, you should understand that I'm telling you this. So go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, you bring up like what people living with HIV have to deal with. Like when you, two things, your point about how flashy and stuff PrEP is, and you hardly hear about U equals U is spot on. I see commercials for PrEP and Descovy all the time. Never seen anything like that for U equals U. I mean, I've seen some stuff that like locally UC did. There was some billboards and stuff, but no like kind of national campaign about it. And I think that would be really helpful. Say,
a lot of even the PrEP ads, and I'm saying gender loving. I'm just, I'm as gay as anybody, but most of the commercials are very gay, which is perpetuating. I think they need to make it towards women, especially if you're trying to reach young, same gender loving men. I hate the term MSM because you're reducing everything they do to just sex. Usually young men have a relationship with some female in their family. It may not be the mother, it might be the aunt, the grandmother or something like that. So you've got to educate their network if you're trying to reach them. Also, these laws, young people are getting caught up in these laws because they're also exploring the sexual freedom, and they don't know about these laws. Nobody really explains these laws, but as case managers and people who are doing this type of work, if you feel it's your responsibility, if they say you have to tell them about these laws, then you also need to tell them their rights. Don't agree to a HIV test. Ask for a lawyer. Cooperate with the police, but don't say anything. We do have rights. They may not be much, but we do have rights. Oh, also, it's important when you do, and I don't like the word disclose, because disclose is also a stigmatizing word, because the definition of disclosure is new or secret information. I prefer to say share your status, because, and a lot of ASOs and people do this work, I always tell people, be careful who you disclose to, instead of empowering them to know that there's no shame in being a person living with HIV. And also people language first, because we stigmatize ourselves so much, and it continues to perpetuate it in the community. And other people do that. But if you're going to share your status, make sure you're in a safe environment. Sometimes it's good to be out at dinner in a public place, because you've always got to plan an escape route, because things can go sour real quick.
And there's a lot of stories from all over the country about that. And it's really sad. And we expect people to do, to disclose and everything. And, it just, how can you expect somebody just the uncomfortable situation?
The word just sounds like 007 or, FBI, disclose, it just makes you feel a certain kind of way. It doesn't empower you. It puts you in a shell. It puts you off in a bubble. So.
Right. Well, and here's a list of kind of things that we recommend that you not do, which Bryan kind of already went into that, but, don't share any information with the police. Don't consent to any kind of testing, and ask for a lawyer right away. And then that lawyer really should be the only one that you're really discussing the situation with. Because I think, when people are arrested or maybe about to be arrested, cops do a really good job of, kind of making you feel like they're on your side.
I can help you. Just tell me. Understand and let your clients know that the police don't have any say. It's up to the prosecutor. They can't help you. They shouldn't be buying you McDonald's, but they do. They're trying to get you to loosen up. But they'll try every tactic to get you say, and anything you say can and will be used against you. Another thing I want to say is, we talk about all these cases that have been prosecuted. Black folks and people in general who have been in the legal system know that plea bargaining is the way that they go. So a lot of times you may be detained or held, but under HIV specific law. But the only way we know whether you were prosecuted or is if you take it to trial. If you plea bargain out, we really don't know, because you don't know what the original charge was. Okay, I see U equals U is up there. And U equals U, I'm sure many know, just so you know, U equals U is undetectable equals untransmittable. It says that a person living with HIV, if they're on effective antiretroviral treatment and has a suppressed viral load, to keep it real simple, a suppressed viral load, and the medication is controlling their virus, the science is clear. They cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. And I strongly encourage people to not use disqualifiers like, well, U equals U is real, but use a condom just in case. Because now you're taking away the joy of them knowing that, like Adam said, the one thing that people worry about is transmitting HIV to their partners. I mean, it worries you sick. So U equals U is not about go out and have all the sex you want to have. It's a feel-good moment for people living with HIV. There are several studies that substantiate U equals U, HBTN 052, the partner study 1, the partner study 2, and opposite attracts, and over 130,000 condomless sex acts. Now, the CDC used to say unprotected sex, and then they changed their language to say condomless, because they recognized that even without a condom, the sex is still protected against HIV because the medication is protecting you. So many people are still being held because they're considered to be sexual predators or a danger to society. Also, U equals U is a strong public health argument of why we need access to care. And one experience I had, I was incarcerated, and I was on my salvage regimen. I was on a regimen that wasn't making me any better, but it wasn't making me any worse. When I went into prison, they changed my regimen to something I was totally resistant to, just to say that they were giving me HIV medication. So as a result, I had cancer 3 times, with the worst being stage 4 cancer chained to a prison bed. So these laws are not helping anyone, totally, especially people living with HIV. If I keep talking about that part, a tear or two might roll down my cheek.
Well, I think, Bryan, you bring up a really good point, because most of the time about U equals U, most of the time when I hear it talked about, it's not an empowering message. And it really is an empowering message. If you think about it, if you're not a person living with HIV and you try to put yourself in someone's shoes for a minute and think about what it's like to disclose, what it's like to let loose and have some fun and have, good sex with somebody, like it's hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. And, as it relates to these laws, we've got to understand, though, viral load doesn't equal value. That's the important thing. Viral load doesn't equal value, even though Michigan modernized their laws based on viral suppression. And that was their state. HIV criminalization laws and HIV issues look different depending on where you live. But understand that some people were telling me that, you shouldn't talk about U equals U when you're talking to legislators about these laws. I said, why not? Because it shouldn't hinge. I say, I understand that the laws, modernizing the laws, shouldn't hinge on viral suppression. But in order to open up their ears and let people know how far we've come, you've got to have the conversation about how we can transmit.
I agree. But to your other point too, like, we don't want to get into a situation like what is going on in Michigan. We don't want to have like a viral load hierarchy or something.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go for
so
it.
Much. But see, everybody wants to say that U equals U caused the viral divide. There was a viral divide even before there was treatment. Right. The systemic and structural disparities made the divide. You can't cause something that was already there. Sometimes people say, well, U equals U is leaving some people behind. U equals U is just about the science, and we need the science in order to modernize these laws. If you have a cure for breast cancer, do you not tell the people who have breast cancer you have a cure because you don't want to make everybody else with cancer feel bad? Now it talks about expunging these laws here. At this point, whether you expunge it or not, the damage has already been done, because the day that you're detained, the next day, the media is going to persecute you, even if you're not charged, even if your status is out there, you are ruined. So expunging the file really does no good. If you go to work for a company, it's a thin line. They say HR is confidential. If I work for a small company and all of a sudden our health premiums go up because of you, I know something is wrong, and people talk.
Right.
People talk.
Bryan, you bring up a point that I don't think a lot of people think about. The whole idea of you can get something expunged. That's great. Obviously, with most of this, you can't get it expunged, even if you wanted to.
But it's still in the news.
But it doesn't matter.
Still on the internet.
And it's never going away. I mean, if that happened to you 10 years ago and you do a Google search with that person's name, it's still going to show up. The video, the articles, whatever it is. And I mean, it's just, this law also has issues when it comes to like people's status, and like that is theirs to share, and it's not an editor at some TV station's decision to do that. I will say that OHMM has been trying to work and pay attention to the media in Ohio to address when they see headlines like that and try to get them changed, try to do a little bit of education with editorial boards and with journalists. So there is some effort around there.
I'll move the next slide because I think our time is I
Yeah,
don't know
we need
what
to
the
get
next
moving.
slide is.
Let's talk about what the law is proposed to change. So go for it. Do you want to take the lead on it, Brian?
Well, I think the whole thing is the most important points, and I think this PowerPoint, I think it can be made available for you.
It will be,
The thing that we're
yes.
trying to do is to make it not a felony. Actual transmission has to occur. Not to be enhanced for sex work if you're a person living with HIV. I think those are some of the points for layman terms. There's probably a lot of technical things that are in there that, but even still, no matter how much we change these laws, when it comes to Black folks and people of color, we're still going to be affected by these laws because molecular surveillance is going to take the place of these laws. And they say molecular surveillance is only about finding the new clusters. But trust and believe, anytime they say we won't be prosecuted, we are.
The other thing that I would say for the law that is the sex offender piece. We want to get that out of there. Obviously, if somebody is charged with a crime that is a sexual assault or pedophilia or something like that, they'd still have to register as a sex offender. But if you are, if that's not related to your crime, if you threw feces at somebody because while you were in jail or something, you're not going to get, that's not sexual in nature. So you're not going to have to register as a sex offender for the rest of your life, basically.
But pedophiles will get out in 5-6 years. And a person who just didn't disclose, didn't transmit, just didn't disclose, will still be incarcerated. They could have. A particular case I've been working on is Nushan Williams, who's in upstate New York. He did his time. He did more than his time. 4 days before he was to get out, they came and got him, and they're holding him under civil confinement, which is akin to quarantine. They're holding him under civil confinement with no out date. He went in when he was 19, 20. Now he's going to be 44. This makes no sense. If he would have killed someone, if he would have stabbed someone and killed someone, he would be home by now.
Right.
You can also learn about Nushan Williams. You go to the free Nushan Williams, just Google freenushanwilliams.com and go to the website. We are fighting to get him released because if one of us is incarcerated, we're all incarcerated. Because if it's me, it could be you.
Hey, Brian, we only got a couple minutes left, but I do have a question from an audience member. I'm going to read it out loud. So what they say is, I've seen charges in Butler County, which is just north of Cincinnati, which are published very, very openly of soliciting with a positive HIV test, in quotation marks. How will modernizing Ohio's laws influence things like that? Is OHMM doing any current work on these urgent issues?
Well, I think the whole thing is we're working to educate the media. We need to start educating the police department to start not releasing that type of information on the night desk. This is what the problem is, and be more concerned about the person as opposed to the sensationalist of the headline. So we're educating the media because the media shapes everyone's opinion. And that's what we have to do. Educate the media, educate the police department. And believe it or not, we've got to educate people who work at ASOs, stakeholders, because a lot of us are still have implicit biases when it comes to these laws.
Yeah, I will just pick up on that. OHMM has done a little bit with some media. We have a monthly webinar, and one of them we had somebody who's an anchor at Channel 9 in Cincinnati give a training, and and they talked about how they changed their language, like they don't use mugshots anymore.
But they said only in certain instances, if the person is a threat to somebody, all the instances are instances that they're going to use for people living with HIV, that you're a threat to the public at large, that you are a threat to people's lives. All these things he listed were things where I see that they can use. So that was just a lot of verbiage.
Yeah, I can see that too. It just made me think at least they're thinking about it, because I don't think they were before.
Covering it up, and at least his public statement, alluded to something, but the real action is not going to happen. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Well, Bryan, it is 7:00. So we got
through it all.
We did get through it all, barely. I'd like to thank everybody. I think there was one question about STIs. Or STIs are concerned. So no, like other STIs like herpes or syphilis or something, you don't see these same type of laws. You only see it with HIV.
And herpes, you still can't cure herpes. But remember, herpes was the HIV at one time. And you don't hear anything about that. Another thing in closing I want to say is our health codes address these conditions. We don't need an HIV-specific law to address the condition. And that's my closing statement.
I'm going to go ahead and echo that. I really agree. All right, everybody.
I hope y'all got something out of it. At least I'm not in my Carol Channing voice by now. I'm normally, anyway.
And if people are interested, we did put a link in the chat for a few of the OHMM webinars. So they record them. You can go to their website and watch any of them that they've had over the past year and a half or so, maybe a little bit more than a year. But yes, we are at time, everybody. The link for the evaluation is in the chat. Please make sure you fill that out by the end of the day tomorrow if you want to receive education credits.